Hello and welcome to another episode of the Headless Giant podcast. I got my buddy Ryder Lee, and we're going to be talking about mind control drugs and mind control operations, talking a little bit about what you can expect to see from mind control drugs, some of the symptoms, some of the history, and let's get into it. So I guess we're going to talk a little bit about MK Ultra program. This is Ryder Lee, Raised by Giants podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell people where they can find you?
What's up, brother? Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. Always love these kind of laid back conversations. Some of the best ones that I've had are super laid back and chill. Yes, you can find me on Raised by Giants on YouTube and any and all podcast platforms. You can follow me on Raised by Giants 8 on Twitter and Twitter X. And Instagram at Raised by Giants Pod. And I am back on Facebook. Yes, after more than almost a year hiatus from Facebook, I am now back because, you got to utilize all those platforms, my friend. You got to do the whole deal when you're a content creator. You can't be slacking on a lot of those platforms. So thanks for having me.
Even though it's distasteful. I get on Facebook and I feel like I got to take a shower afterwards. It's like, oh,
it was so toxic. It's so toxic on Facebook. But what's interesting is that like TikTok, they're trying to do the TikTok ban. Right. And regardless of what you think of like TikTok, I think that the reason they're hiding it under the guise that it's China and like a data collection thing when it's really not. It's really about the ability to blow up and go viral. They don't want normal everyday people having the ability to amass thousands and thousands of views. TikTok is kind of, not so much anymore, but it used to be the way that YouTube was. You remember YouTube back in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, like people would just blow up on there because the algorithm supported it. And that's kind of what TikTok was. And that's why they were going after TikTok, hardcore and saying, oh, it's a China spy, which it may be, who knows. But at least with TikTok, they would push your videos out regardless of what you said or what the content was even about. Right. So I think that that's what's going on with this government TikTok ban. It's not about data. It's not about Chinese spying on us. It's literally the ability to blow up and go viral, and they don't want to just give that ability to anyone and everyone. So They're starting to reel that back now. Now TikTok is getting more community guidelines stuff, just like what YouTube did with people, right? They can just slap on the community guidelines violation for whatever it is that they want, even though you may not have done anything. So that's the direction that TikTok is going. So really X is our only 100% free speech platform. So
supposedly.
But I mean, it's definitely better than a lot of the other ones, right? You can pretty much get on there. I know that there's still been people that's lost their account and gotten violations and all that, but for the most part, for me, I've never gotten anything on X ever. But I've gotten them on Instagram, I've gotten them on Facebook, I've gotten them on YouTube, I've gotten them on TikTok. Right? It's like soon as I start to get any kind of momentum going, it's like boom, immediately a freaking community guidelines violation every time, dude. Everywhere but X.
But you're trying to break stories. That's the problem. If you're coming out with rehashed old material that a lot of other people have done, they don't care so much. But if you've got original reporting and you've got original perspectives and original, breaking news, they don't want that. They don't want that at all. And, in a lot of ways, I see that as sort of like the mind control aspect. It's you've got to control the filters, right? So if you can control the filters as to what people are focusing on and thinking about, you can have a much greater degree of control. And I think we saw that really with the Google studies that they were doing, where they actually looked at which search results popped up most often, and they found that with a little bit of manipulation, you can basically control a person's attention and focus it towards the places you want them to go. And in an election year, that's incredibly important. But
Well,
I
not
mean,
only that, you got Google's AI doing all kinds of wacky things, bro. You got Google's AI like giving diversity and like creating people out of thin air, and you know, it's wild. I'm pretty sure Google's AI has lost millions of dollars based off of the bogus results whenever you type in something, and they give you stuff that isn't true.
right,
It's like, well, what's going on here? I thought Google was supposed to be the arbiter of truth, and the Google AI is just making up a bunch of nonsense and throwing people into roles that they weren't supposed to, that they were never in.
right,
It's so interesting that people think that we live in such an advanced society in such an advanced world when and that things are can just get better and get better and better. And I'm like, well, is AI really that good? I haven't seen AI really produce quality things,
right.
you
Well, that's
know?
the point, is that it's low quality and mass production.
uh,
You
that's
know,
right.
I mean, it's all you see everywhere is just this low quality AI video, and just slapped out there. All these people who do voice acting and everything else, they're all out of a job. Why would you need them? You just need 3 minutes of their speech.
And writers too.
Right,
Writers are really going to suffer hardcore, especially movie writing and TV writing. And I think that was the whole purpose of that whole writer strike in Hollywood. Right? It was like, oh well, you guys don't want to work, you guys want to be paid more. Well, guess what we're going to do? We're just going to have AI take all your jobs. AI is now going to rule and write all of these shows. I mean, I'm pretty sure that what's that one movie where they had the evil kid Superman? It wasn't like Superman, but it was gave the impression and the idea that it was
oh,
Superman.
Shazam.
No, 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 no. It was like a rated R like superhero movie where it was like a kid and then he was like an evil Superman. I can't think of the name. Brightburn. No, isn't that Brightburn? I don't know. Anyway, they're making a sequel to that movie and it's going to be completely written by AI.
Right, and they could have AI actors and everything, and just go in and re-edit it. All you got to do is put in the text, and now you get pretty high quality video. It's almost indistinguishable from, regular video. And these are all just AI characters, all just rendered out of nothing. So I think that's going to be a huge mind control factor in the next coming elections. I don't know if you heard, but they recently caught a teacher who was about to get fired try to frame the principal for racism by making an AI recording of his voice and then saying, this is him saying those racist things. And before it could take off, they just ran it through a program. And they're like, no, this is AI. This guy's trying to frame up this principal because he was getting fired. And now this is our first AI false flag. So I think there's going to be lots more,
Well, then that becomes a question too, is like, well, if we're just now getting this type of technology and the public is able to do this, how long have these other organizations and three-letter agencies and the military and the government had this technology? Because we know that they don't give us anything that they don't already have.
Right.
There's no possible way that AI was just now created in the past couple of years. I mean, AI has been running these social media companies for freaking years.
Right.
You think that these are people that are doing all this stuff? It's not people. It's freaking AI. I mean, it's been AI for a really long time. And I'm sure that if you talk to somebody that works at one of these social media companies, they don't even know how it works.
Well,
they have no idea.
We do have your work as sort of like a benchmark when it comes to JFKX and your high quality video showing the squibs. Because if they had AI back then, they wouldn't have had to do all that. Yeah. All the editing and all the missing frames and everything else. That's a pretty good benchmark. Maybe at that point, they started to pivot away from thinking about, physical effects. I mean, look at the moon landing. You can see a lot of physical effects going on there. And I think having that sort of benchmark is important, because now we can sort of see the transition. And because the governments have always been involved in hoaxing and faking things. And what we see now is sort of like the next level of that, the next iteration. And I think, even UFOs, if we want to talk about mind control, UFOs, I know you've got the Operation Bluebeam. I don't know how real that is. I think that's more of like a preparatory thing, sort of getting people accustomed to the idea of it. But at the same time, that would be a mind control event, just a mass level hoax that if you go against it in the future after that point, you're a pariah. That's sort of the thing too, is having big events that are meant to shape your personality and shape your mental perception creates a rift automatically. Right off the bat, people have two solutions in mind. They're given two solutions. And if those two solutions don't accommodate, then they add another one. They add another layer. And then they put that into the mix and see where things shake out. But basically, like you were saying, the reason why they want control over these platforms is because they don't want to let something go viral that they don't already have a narrative for.
That's right. That's exactly right. And with Project Bluebeam, I don't think that that's ever going to happen because there's been too many people that's warned against that. And normally things that people warn about and say that is going to happen never happens. And I actually talked with a gentleman that's going to be in our second documentary, which is going to be about MK Ultra and Hollywood and Stanley Kubrick and the moon landings and The Shining and all that. And his dad was the right-hand man to Sidney Gottlieb, which was the head of the MK Ultra programs.
Head poisoning.
And I was and I was sitting down and I was talking with him, and he brought up this idea of Project Bluebeam, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there's he brought up that people were seeing Mother Mary. Remember that whole big thing back, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years ago, where people were seeing like visions of like Mother Mary and all that." And I was like, yeah, that seems like a Project Bluebeam type of thing, a Project Bluebeam event, right? Because I think that was, the goal was to, make it seem like these messiahs from these religious camps have all come back, so for the Christians it would be Jesus, for the Muslims it would be Muhammad, the Buddhists it would be Buddha, and they're all descending from the clouds and all that. And then he was like, well, you know what Project Bluebeam originally was, right? I said, oh, no, I don't. And he said, well, it was an MK Ultra sub project, but it wasn't called Project Bluebeam. It was called Project Blue Bolt. And what they were trying to do with Project Blue Bolt was to put the vision, not make it external to people, but to beam the hallucination directly inside of people's heads. So instead of making it external to them, like something that they see in the sky, is actually a hallucination that's being beamed into your head. And that made sense to me, because then you can make other people see different things than other people. Because if everyone saw the same thing, I mean, everyone's got cameras in their pocket now. You have a very high definition camera on your phone that you can get video of something. So if they did a big event like that, then they would see that, well, this country is seeing Buddha, this other country is seeing Muhammad, this other country is seeing Jesus. So why is all this stuff different? It made more sense that, well, if they did it inside of your head, if they beam the signal directly into your head, then it could all be happening simultaneously, but everybody's seeing something different.
Right.
And then that correlates to what MK Ultra Monarch survivor Kathy O'Brien has talked about on my show several times before. That's pretty much what they did with her, but they did it with an extraterrestrial. They did it with a reptilian. They showed her an holographic portrayal of a reptilian and tried to make her believe that it was these extraterrestrial reptilians that was responsible for all the stuff in order to cover up government involvement and human beings actually being the ones to do this. And that's what I think the agenda is behind the extraterrestrial narrative, is to cover up the fact that it's all humans and it's always been humans. But in order to take the blame away from humans, they've created an invisible scapegoat, something that you never see, something that you can't prove exists, something that you don't, that no one can prove exists. There's no evidence for. Right? So if you can shift the blame to something that is questionable if it's even real or not, then you can continue to get away with everything that you've been doing, all the other crimes and the real humans and the real people that are perpetrating this upon humanity. Right. Just gets slid under the rug.
And I think even the hardcore UFO people call those like screen visions or something, where you've got this sort of screen reality in front of what's actually going on. And it's funny that would be, an admission, but at the same time, you have to assume that these programs are actually harder to fool people with up close. You'd have to have several trained magicians on staff basically figuring out the best angles and the best ways that you could have these things work out and not suspect that there were humans behind it. But doing that brings a lot of heat, brings a lot of attention. And so you don't necessarily want that. You got to kind of make do with what you have and just hope that not enough people are into it. But I think times like now, when people are focused on the UFO thing, they're really starting to ask the tough questions of their own governments, is like, how much involvement is this? Because you guys were involved in MK Ultra and you poisoned many, many thousands of people, and you had Clive Lewis talking about how there was experiments going on in West Virginia. Right?
Yeah, that was a very interesting theory, which I brought up my theory of what happened with the Mothman, and he had a whole new one, and I was kind of like, holy crap, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, we don't know if it's true, or because there's no evidence and no proof of it, but it's a very interesting theory. But at least he agreed with me that they, purposefully brought down the Silver Bridge and, did that on purpose to distract away from something. Now, regardless if that was the Mothman or if it was, to get people off track on really what was going on. And it's just a coincidence that nobody in Point Pleasant after the Silver Bridge collapsed ever saw the Mothman again, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. And putting two and two together, the Men in Black showing up to tell the people of Point Pleasant to kind of stop talking about the Mothman, it kind of correlates when you put two and two together. But, it's just a theory. But the interesting part of Screen Memories is that Screen Memories first popped up with Bud Hopkins in his book in, I believe, 1980. It was either 1980 or 1981, called Missing Time. And he created a lot of different theories that have been perpetuated within the community. One is, of course, missing time. The other one is, Screen Memories. And how we got these ideas and these thoughts were regressing so-called alien abductees and experiencers, right? And this is where the whole thing of like regression really like takes on a life of its own, because regression was never meant to hypnotic regression was never meant to like find out if you'd been freaking abducted or that if you had alien contact or like any of that stuff. It had everything to do with like helping you better your life, like quit smoking, like, help people with addictions and stuff like that. And then it's evolved into like a past life thing or an alien regression thing or an alien abduction thing.
It's a catch-all.
Yeah. And the problem is if you have somebody that already thinks that they've been abducted, they go to a person that is quote unquote specialized in alien abduction regression sessions, right? What do you think that you're going to find?
Alien abduction regressions.
That's right. And then if you go to let's say it's kind of like the theory that I've, kind of been trying to talk to people about is like, and I spoke about it with Clyde Lewis yesterday. If you take a paranormal investigator, you take them to a haunted location, they're going to come out of there saying that the house is haunted, right? You take a Bigfoot investigator into that exact same house, they're going to come out and say, "Oh, it's Bigfoot. Bigfoot's definitely here. Bigfoot's been here." Blah, 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 blah. If you take an alien and a UFO investigator to the exact same house, they're going to come out with say, "Oh, it's definitely aliens." Like we tend to just stay on our preconceived notions of what we already believe, and when we already believe in something, it's easy to see that everywhere. It's kind of like that old expression: if you look into something long enough, you can create whatever it is that fits your agenda. If you dig hard enough, you can find whatever it is to support your preconceived beliefs, thoughts, and ideas. It's kind of like the Bible, right? Like the Bible is like a catch-all for everything. Like you can pretty much find an example of anything in the Bible to justify your beliefs or your idea or whatever it is that's going on in your life at that time. You can find a reference for something that's happening to you in the Bible, right? And it's done that way it's written that way on purpose,
right? But at the same time, I think people have done this naturally. Like we see the examples in polytheism where you'll have similar gods in different areas, but they kind of change from one place to the next. And I think what it really depends on is what the people are focused on. And I think that goes back into what their professions are in that area and how they make their living. So you'll have some Bible verses in a city that will be focused on. And then in a rural community, they're obviously going to be much more agrarian in the Bible, and they're going to be focusing on those things. So it's almost like the land and how you work the land is sort of the lens in how you view God and the supernatural and all the rest of these things. Unfortunately, that doesn't make for a very easy communication. But at the same time, it makes sense.
And a lot of contradictions as well, like they can just contradict each other. And that's why there's all these different sects of Christianity. That's why there's all these different denominations, because they're like, "Oh, well, I don't believe in that section that you're talking about. I'm going to go create my own church and create my own thing where the people believe what I believe." It's that exact same type of rhetoric, and that's been spread across really everything. And when you look into the MK Ultra programs, man, you see that the government really was trying to bring the experiments and the things that they were doing on an individual level to the public, but under the guise of something virtuous. And that's something that's been a thing for a really long time. It's always been under the guise of something virtuous, because the way to get people on board with something is to make them believe that it's their idea to do it. That's how everything works. That's how the whole AI thing that we were talking about earlier, that's how all that works. Because 4 or 5 years ago, you had, especially people in this community, they were like, oh, I'll never use AI. AI is the devil. I'll never mess with no AI. I don't want no cyborgs running my stuff. And now all those people are on board with it. They're all using it, right? So what you do is that you have to subvert them in a way that makes them think that they actually have a benefit, that they're going to get something out of it. And then whenever a few people hop on board with it, and the others that were against it for a long period of time sees what kind of benefit that it gave the people that were into it, then they jump on board, because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be at a disadvantage. Like, these people have an upper hand because they're using AI to create some of their content, write their stuff, make AI photos, make AI videos. So I might as well jump on the bandwagon too. And that's how things are really gotten away with. But through studying these MK Ultra programs, you see that, and this is an important thing, because a lot of people think that MK Ultra was just about LSD, and that's not true. That's but that's what they try and put it out there as, like a wacky thing that they don't do anymore. And then it was from this wacky guy, Sidney Gottlieb, that was into the occult and all this wacky stuff. And he was just trying to dose these people with LSD to try and see if he can mind control them and make them do things that they normally wouldn't do. But that's through reading the documentation, which there's been a lot of them that has been destroyed. I believe whenever the CIA got in trouble for doing the MK Ultra programs, they ended up burning, I think, documentation for at least 150 to 200 or maybe even more documents. So you have 139 sub projects of MK Ultra that are verified, but who knows how many more that there were, and who knows how many more Canada also got, because whenever MK Ultra, got in trouble and the CIA got in trouble, they just outsourced all of that to Canada, and Canada kind of took over the program after that. But when you look into these programs and you read the documentation, which a lot of people don't, because they either don't have the time, they don't want to do it, they think that it's boring, but some documentation is really, really important to read. You'll see through the MK Ultra sub projects that not only were they using LSD, they were using antipsychotics. Antipsychotics were tested on these MK Ultra victims before they were brought to the public. Antidepressants.
Pharmaceutical test.
Huge. Pretty much all of them. And amphetamines. Amphetamines were tested on MK Ultra victims before that they were brought to the public, which amphetamines is like Adderall and Ritalin, which Adderall and Ritalin, that's given to our children at a really young age for ADHD, and all of those types of pharmaceutical compounds and pharmaceutical drugs were tested on the people within the programs before they were brought to the public. And it just brings into the question, well, what's going on here? And when you look at the statistics, which I looked them up like a year ago, and the most recent study that I could find was from 2014 to 2016, and that study said that 48% of the United States population was on some form of pharmaceutical drug. Now, that's an alarming amount of people, very alarming. And I'm confident in saying 7 to 8 years later after that study, it's dramatically gone up. I could confidently say, even though there's not, confirmation on online, or there's not any study that's been done in 2023 to 2024, we could pretty much agree that you could say that more than half of the United States is on some form of pharmaceutical drug. Now, what is that doing to the population? Is that stunning our spiritual growth? Is that cutting off our connection to the earth? Is that cutting off our spiritual antenna? Jerry Marzinski, which is a psychiatrist, and I've had him on my show 3 times, I believe, and he's a psychiatrist. He wrote a book called Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, and he went around to all of these prisons and hospitals and emergency units and emergency care units, and he worked with schizophrenic people, and he discovered that these drugs really do nothing, and they pretty much make the symptoms worse. Now, that's not my opinion. That's his opinion. He's a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know. I can't comment on the effectiveness or the non-effectiveness of any of these drugs, and I've never used any of them, so I don't know how they are. But he says that with working with these schizophrenics and these people, which Jim brings in a completely other conversation of like these voices that these patients hear, and the where do our thoughts come from? Our thoughts are our own thoughts, and he equates it to like, our consciousness is like kind of like a dial, right? Like a a radio frequency. And depending on where you turn the dial on the radio band, depends on the type of thoughts that you get. So if you're turning it to a higher frequency, you're going to get more positive thoughts. If you're tuning it to a lower frequency, you're going to get low, more malicious and more evil thoughts. And he equates these schizophrenic people and these ones that have, mental health problems as to being demonically possessed. Now, I can't confirm or deny that either, because I don't really know what a demon is. Like, I don't think anyone really knows what an actual demon is. But if it was a demon, then it would be in control of your thoughts. It would be a voice. But the way that he explains it is, it's not an external voice, right? He says that it's not a voice that's talking to these people that's different than what they are. It's not like I am the voices, I am demon Beelzebub or whatever. He says that it's literally just the voice in your head. It sounds like you, but it's really destructive and very negative. It tells you all these evil things, like to harm yourself, to harm others. And I think it's a possibility that a lot of this has to do with drugs. Drugs is the portal that opens this up, and I actually had him back on with another gentleman. His title is Boston 2%. That's his tag on his social media and on TikTok. And I had him on, and he's talking about how methamphetamine just opened his, put him into like a complete psychosis, where he thought that he was God and that he had like all these superpowers and like all this stuff that he's talking about. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And illicit drug use is a really big factor as well. So you not only have pharmaceutical drugs, you also have illicit drugs, like illegal drugs that you can't get from a pharmacy or get with a doctor's prescription, that almost sort of kind of does the exact same thing. I mean, you can go into a psychosis with cocaine, you can go into a psychosis with crack, you can go into a psychosis with meth. Some people can go into a psychosis with freaking downers. So we're being hit from many different angles, and I don't think that there's an actual study of how many people in the United States are on illicit drugs. There may be, I might be able to Google it, but if you combine illicit drugs with pharmaceutical drugs, then the numbers just go up.
Right.
And they continue to go up. So it's like, what is happening here? And of course, I want to let you talk because I've been rambling for a second.
No, I think you're bringing up a really good topic there, which is the intersection between drugs and spirituality. I think that's been so played out when it comes to hallucinogens and all the rest of these different mind expanding experiences, that there's some sort of connection between how we perceive the world and how, we interact with it. And I think, for a long time, you can find even references in the Bible, the marijuana references, like Cana in the Bible is actually marijuana. It comes from the Proto-Indo-European word Cana, which means cannabis, cannabosum. And so they're referencing that as a sacrifice or a burnt offering. And so what you can assume is that that's what was going on inside the temples all across the Mediterranean, is they had these massive braziers full of Cana that they would burn, and people would come to the temple and get really super high as these offerings were going on. And so, that should put some of the ancient religions into perspective. Is, if it doesn't make sense, it's probably because the people who are experiencing these things were really super high.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
Having that perspective, it brings us up to the CIA and what they've been doing, using, because again, what you keep talking about is that it's all sort of connected to prophecy. They want to be able to say this is going to happen, and then having the people experience that so that they can all be on the same page, all be on the same narrative. And that's the essence of what I think mind control is giving people a prompt, having something happen, and then shoveling them all into that narrative sort of portal or dichotomy, so that they can destroy the evildoers, and you don't have to spend as much on military, right? So you can get everybody on the same page, all of society, and then they go after the outsiders and increase your power as the one behind the whole process. And I think, if you look at what they were doing as a massive drug trial when it comes to, MK Ultra, you start to see maybe the reason why everybody's on these drugs today is because they know what it does to people, and they know what it does long term. And the best pharmaceutical results they could get were these, unscrupulous doctors like Jolly and West, who just basically went around dosing people, whoever the government told them to. And you see him right next to what's that hippie's name? He died recently. Charles Manson, right? And he's also close to the guy who shot what's his name? The
RFK.
guy. Yeah. RFK and Jack Ruby too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, then you also have like Operation Midnight Climax. You have one of the operations that was destroyed with the files that I was talking about earlier was just speculatory and a theory at this point, because there's not any proof or evidence of it, because it was destroyed, which was called Project Spellbinder, which was a project in order to mind control someone like MK Ultra, someone to assassinate people. And what the whole idea and the theory behind Project Spellbinder was to brainwash someone to assassinate Fidel Castro. That's what it was. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that, violence is also a part of this. Not only subservience and, the agenda, but also violence and in some cases, like the theoretical Project Spellbinder assassination as well. And that's sort of what our next documentary is going to involve as well. Some of that.
Well, I think one of the main goals of a good mind control drug is to induce apathy, because with apathy you can start to reprogram the individual, right? So once you don't care so much about what it is you're doing, then it can be really easy to get you into that next phase of, well, this is what you're doing, we're giving you this option. And one of the most prominent and recorded drugs in that regard is one called scopolamine, and that comes from this borrachero tree down in Colombia and South America, and it's used down there by drug gangs and prostitutes as a method of doping someone and then having them give over all of the information that they may need, all of the money. They've even had people empty out their entire apartments of all of their furniture so that this pimp and the prostitute can steal it. It's called devil's breath. And this devil's breath scopolamine is a common mind control drug down in South America. And it's really interesting because that was part of the MK Ultra program, but they only talk about LSD, because talking about scopolamine and some of these other quote unquote truth serums, because scopolamine is also used in truth serum to get the person to be more relaxed and able to be suggestible, right? And so you've also got another truth serum that's called sodium pentothal, and that's commonly portrayed on lots of different TV shows. They give somebody an injection, they put them into the polygraph test, and then they start to get loopy and dopey and start to answer the questions a little bit more freely. But all of those were definitely tested in MK Ultra, and it's not just limited to LSD, which didn't have a high mind control quotient, but it did produce the type of hysteria that they would want to have a mass population sort of induced into, so that they could come forward with the solutions.
That's right. Problem action, problem reaction solution, right? That's the thing that they always follow. So if you create the problem, you already know what the reaction is going to be, because it can only be a handful of different things. So then you plan for all the different reactions, and then based off of those reactions, you already have the solution. All right. So it's a plan on top of a plan on top of a plan. And there's a detailed way within the MK Ultra documents on how they break down the mind in order to insert thoughts, ideas, and beliefs into people's heads, because it was originally done with a drug that was called BZ. Now I can't pronounce the real title of what BZ is, because it's a really weird, like quinzyl diazobenzolate or something like that, really weird name, the actual pharmaceutical name. But this substance was 100 times more powerful than LSD, and it was like in like a powdered, like a white powdered form. It would essentially make people go out of their minds for long periods of time, like weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. And this was originally tested on military personnel to see if they could get the people that had top secret information or classified information, if they could remove the top secret classified information from the military personnel's head, so that they wouldn't be able to reveal any of the military secrets, so they can go out and live a normal life after their military service was over. And once they figured that out, then they were like, okay, well, if we can remove memories and thoughts and ideas and top secret classified information from these military people's heads, military personnel, can we insert ideas, thoughts, and beliefs into their head?
Right.
So pretty much what they would do is they would torture these subjects to a point to where they lose common sense and like critical thinking. So it kind of wipes their brain of like normal rational thoughts. And this torture doesn't have to be like horrendously torturous, right? I think that people have a wrong idea of like what torture can be. It doesn't have to be like physically brutal. It can be psychologically brutal, right?
Right.
It can be to the point where, which is just an example, like you could be in a small encased room. They could come in and tell you, you have to put your hands up on the wall and keep your hands on the wall with your feet spread apart for 24 hours. You know, what that's psychologically going to do to you. And if you fall, then they'll come in and tase you or whatever, which is just an example. Not saying that really happened, but it can be something as simple as that. And the psychological torture of just having your hands constantly on the wall, not being able to move or take your hands off the wall or move around, is going to eventually break you down. And I think that people think that it's like a hardcore physical thing, that they're going in and they're beating them and they're doing that. That creates too much resistance. See, they want to break down people psychologically, because when you break them down, their mental state down psychologically, that pretty much clears out the common sense, critical thinking, and rational thought. So then they can come in and reprogram your mind with something that is that may possibly be real, might not be real, in order to implant thoughts and ideas into your head according to the agenda that they want you to do. So then they would come in, and after they felt that they had been broken down enough psychologically, they would come in, and this is the official version. They could have been doing this many different ways, but the official version of what psychic driving is they would take in a looped, repeated audio message, right? Something that's just on a recorder that would play 24/7 for weeks and days. And it could have had whatever on it. It could have been as simple as you're nothing, you're garbage, everyone hates you, or it could have been something way more nefarious, right? And nobody really knows what was on those looped audio messages. And that that kind of gets tucked away in the subject's mind, like, and then I'm thinking, oh well, if they could do that with like a recorder and like just an audio message, could they not have wheeled a freaking TV into the room and played the same thing and also gave them a visual and an audio psychic driving message? And then you can take that one step further. Could they have not have put something on the subject's head? Could they have not put some kind of goggles, some sort of VR technology on their head, and then after they've been tortured and drugged, and then they dose them with some sort of drug, put this VR simulation on their head, they're going to believe it. Right. They're going to believe whatever was on that looped audio message, whatever was on that TV screen, whatever was in those VR goggle glasses.
Well, what they refer to over and over again in the MK Ultra documents is de-patterning. So the de-patterning.
That's the right. I was trying to think of what that was called, and you're 100% correct. That is what it's called, is de-patterning. That's where they remove the common sense and credit. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right, but that's sort of like the 3-step process. So this is why LSD was important, is because it aided in the de-patterning. So it sort of takes you outside of that normal sphere that you're comfortable thinking in. And then once you've got that place outside of it, then you can start to input those new patterns that you want to see come about. And, it's funny, for so many years, the government said the MK Ultra projects were a failure. And it's like, by what degree, by what metric are you calling them a failure? And that was never explained. It was a success in showing that this is the way you do it. But maybe LSD wasn't the drug that they were using. Because again, scopolamine, or devil's breath, is right there. And they never talk about that in any mainstream sort of examination of the MK Ultra program or what could have come out of it,
Yes, de-patterning, drugging, and then psychic driving. Yeah, right. That's the way that it was done, and it's all over the documents, just like what you said. And I think the way to throw the public off is to say that there wasn't any results for it and that it didn't work, right? Because maybe it didn't work in the way that they wanted it to work, but then they just tweak it and turn it into. Because normally whenever there's like an operation and the operation doesn't work out the way that they wanted it to work out, they have figured out the way not to do it.
Right.
So they can tweak it and adjust it, change the name of it, make it a different program, run it under a different name. But the testing phase of it was MK Ultra, the official MK Ultra program was the testing phase, was them trying to figure out how it works, what they need to do, how they need to do it. And then it got disclosed in order for everyone to be like, oh, well, this was something that we did years and years and years ago, and we're no longer doing it anymore. Bullshit. Right. You're not doing it anymore. I mean, you can just look around you in the world and see that it's what's going on, And it's the exact same thing that happened with the Stargate project, the remote viewing Stargate project that happened in 1978 and ran until 95. They did the exact same thing. The CIA was supposed to take over the remote viewing program in 95. Then the CIA came out and canceled the program and said that no intelligence data had ever been collected from the program. Well, that's bullshit too. Why would you keep a program operating for 15 to 18 years if you didn't yield any results? It's nonsense.
Right.
You're not going to keep something running for that amount of time and it be useless. You
Right.
know?
I think it's
So
important for people to know that the government has a different form of reproduction than human beings. They reproduce when it comes to policy. So as those policies start to come into effect, you get what's called fail forward. So what they'll do is they'll say publicly, we failed. And then privately, they'll throw all of their stuff over to a corporation that they've outsourced all of those duties to, and then they'll pick up there. And then anything that that corporation or that government contractor is doing is now part of their corporate secrets. So they can keep that without any disclosure to the rest of the public. So it's this constant process of starting with something unethical, throwing it over to your business associates, letting those business associates take it from there and use the same protocols and policies to advance the agenda that was behind the whole project to begin with.
that is a perfect example of what's gone on and what continues to go on. I mean, that's the way to do it, because no private organization or government contractor is required to disclose any information about any testing, any program, anything that they've been doing. They're not, because it's not a government. It's not an official government program. It's an outsourced government program to private companies. So you got like SRI with the SRI International with the remote viewing. A lot of those stuff was funded by the CIA, funded by the DIA, funded by the DoD, and the Air Force at one point. And you have like Raytheon. You got what's the other one?
Northrop Grumman.
You got Bigelow Aerospace. You have all these different private government contracting groups that are pretty much considered the government at this point by how many programs and operations that has been outsourced to them. But again, they're private companies, they're private organizations, and nothing can ever, they don't have to disclose any information. And that's the way that a lot of this stuff has been gotten away with, is because the government starts it, government discloses it, says that there's nothing to it, nothing happened, it wasn't successful. Then it's exactly what you said, and then they just outsource it to these, or they can do it to a different country. Like in the case of MK Ultra, they outsourced most of the MK Ultra stuff to Canada,
right?
Which is outside the government's, the United States government's grasp. And very little from those MK Ultra programs from Canada has been disclosed. But most of them happened in like psychiatric facilities, like state hospitals and prisons and stuff like that, where like electroshock therapy and like really torturous things were happening at mental hospitals, which then brings into a whole other topic and a whole other thing too, because a lot of this stuff is being done on children as well, and that's a really important topic to get into. And there is a Netflix documentary, I don't know if you've watched it. Yeah, but it's called The Programs, Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping. And this documentary is unbelievable. I had no idea that this was an actual thing, and I couldn't believe that it was actually on Netflix. It was like, holy crap, I was shocked. Right, well, behavioral modification schools, behavioral modification camps. There's actually another documentary that came out, I believe, in 2020 that was called Hell Camp, or maybe it's Camp Hell or something. And this whole thing started in the 70s in Utah, where they would take these kids, they would abduct these kids in the middle of the night from their home. Their parents would pay this company and this organization to have these men show up in a blacked out SUV, come to these kids' homes in the middle of the night, handcuff, blindfold their kid, throw them in the back of an SUV, either throw them on the plane or drive them if it's close enough, to one of these behavioral modification schools, to a behavioral modification camp, or like I was mentioning, the first one was in Utah, and it was like a 60-day journey through the freaking wilderness where these kids would just be out hiking for 60 days.
Right.
But the really nefarious ones are these like behavioral modification schools, right? Where they're actually like, they're not in the wilderness, they're not outside, they're in like a building, they're not allowed to leave the building. It's like a psychiatric facility for children, for kids, and they would be beaten, they would be tortured, they would be psychically driven. If people really need to watch this documentary, I did a show about this with Shane the Ruiner, called The Academy Programs. But that is going on, and is still going on to this very day.
Right.
Still a thing that still happens. Paris Hilton was also involved in this. She was taken to a facility called Provo Canyon where she was tortured. You know, these are mini mind control freaking facilities is what they are. And they have them repeating these phrases over and over again. Like, it's unbelievable the footage that is in this documentary of abuse and torture that these children were going through. And they also had the parents brainwashed. They would do these meetings, like these monthly meetings, dude. This is wild shit. They would do these monthly meetings with these parents that put their kids inside of these schools, and a lot of them were really expensive, like upwards of like $30,000 to $40,000 a year to some of these behavioral modification schools. And they would have these meetings monthly where they would have all these parents come, and they would have them like dress up. Like, they would have men like dressed up in women's clothing and like in dresses and like all this weird shit. And they were like doing like meditations, and they were like all holding hands, like running around in a circle and shit. It was like a ritual, dude. It was the weirdest freaking thing that I've ever seen. So not only did they have the kids weren't able to tell their parents what they were going through in the torturous conditions, and like not being fed, being beaten, being tortured, pretty much being mind controlled, being told to psychically driven by repeating phrases like hands up, hands down, hands to the side, hands together, like over and over and over again for like hours. One lady on the documentary said that they would use the opening to 2001 A Space Odyssey on repeat over and over and over again, which is exactly what I just explained as what psychic driving was, is a looped audio repeated message over and over again. And it's just unbelievable that this is even legal, that it's even legal to do. How can you do? And the thing about these programs is a lot of them were completely unlegitimate, because they basically say that, and a lot of the kids weren't even that bad of children. They weren't. That's the problem with these programs, is that it's the parents thinking that their children are unruly and unbehaved children when they're really not. The parents just don't want to deal with them. So it's literally like a psychiatric facility. Some of the insane asylums that were in the United States in the very beginning, because whenever those first opened up, you could take a family member, you could take your wife, you could take your child, you could just drop them off at this psychiatric insane asylum, and they would admit them for nothing. You could just say, "Oh, my wife isn't obeying she's not doing exactly what I want her to do," and they would take her and torture her, electric shock her, hydrotherapy her, do all this torturous stuff, maybe even lobotomize her, perform surgeries on her. For all the husband said is that she wouldn't take out the trash a couple of times. It's ridiculous stuff like that.
Right.
And these kids are not bad kids. They're not that unruly, but they're put in this situation. Their kids pay this company to come and abduct them. They take them to this facility. They're not able to leave. They're being beaten. They're being mind controlled. And they say that they have to obey the program in order to graduate. So whenever you graduate the program, you get a diploma, a high school diploma. but it turns out that the high school diplomas weren't even real. They weren't even real high school diplomas. They were fake high school diplomas. So everyone that went through this facility that graduated at the age of 17 or 18 doesn't even have a freaking high school diploma. So they basically went through all that for nothing. They have to go and get their GED.
Well, I think it's important that it took place in Utah, because Utah is the alphabet agency playground. They love recruiting from Utah. They love having Mormons join up. I think most of the FBI are Mormons. A lot of the CIA are Mormons, because a lot of what Mormonism is keeping secrets and being able to keep secrets. And even you hear a lot of Mormons on podcasts talking about how they would never reveal what they've actually done in these confessional sessions, because then they get in trouble, right? But that teaches the children how to lie, and it teaches them how to cheat, and it teaches them how to get away with stuff in front of authorities, when really you want to have an open dialogue and an open communication with your kids. But at that point, there is no more open communication. It's only lies. And so, having that take place in Utah is a big giveaway who is behind it.
Well, that's where the original process and the original foundation for what would later become behavioral modification schools started, with the wilderness retreats, but it branched out into schools, and they're located all over the United States in the early 2000s, not just Utah. The one that the Netflix documentary that I'm talking about, the program Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping happened in upstate New York in a place called Ivy Ridge. So it's not just Utah. It's kind of like everywhere, but Utah is a big hub for it. Arizona is another big hub for it, and New Mexico. So like that part of the sort of Midwest area, yeah, Four Corners is is really the hub for a lot of these behavioral modification schools. I mean, Paris Hilton, I think, went to the one in Utah. It became a school after it had become a wilderness retreat. So, I mean, it's just wild, dude. It's wild it's basically a human trafficking. That's what it is.
Right. And in some form or another, we've had institutionalized human trafficking in America since the very beginning. And, you don't really think about it like that, but that's really the case. You've got slavery going on. Then you've got, which is interesting too, because the Underground Railroad was a project by Northern troops. It was a project by the government, and it was funded by the government. And that, was also a human trafficking ring. And then you keep on going through the years, and you find it over and over again. You've got these orphan trains going around at the turn of the century, a huge human trafficking coming directly over from Europe, and then just taking these kids and plunking them out, wherever people wanted to bid on them and buy these orphans, quote unquote orphans. They weren't actually orphans. They had parents. They just bought the kids and shuttled them out to the American West, and a lot of those kids, we never know what happened to them. And so this is just really an extension of that whole project. And what I think Jerry Marzinski was really important about his work is there's no time limit on anything he's talking about. It's always been this way, and having that as a clue, and knowing other observant people, maybe psychopaths, have been watching this for centuries, they kind of figure it out after a while, and they sort of keep those secrets to themselves and spread them amongst themselves. And then we get massive states, working on the same principles.
Yep. Sorry, coughing. I'm trying to get over sickness here. And Jerry Marzinski's work is really incredible. I mean, he's got the data. He's talked to a lot of these schizophrenic mentally ill patients. He sees that these voices and that there's patterns to these schizophrenic people. They talk about the same thing. The dialogue between the voices that they're hearing and their own voice is like almost identical. It's almost the same thing. So there's only a few conclusions that you can really come to if you're seeing all these weird and strange patterns within each and every single person. They're different people, but all their experiences are typically the same. It's always a negative voice. It's never positive. It's always telling them to harm themselves if they, well, I think first is, harm someone else. And then if you can't harm somebody else, it's harm yourself. Pluck your eye out of your head and we'll leave you alone. Cut your tongue out and we'll leave you. Those are just examples. Not saying that those actually happen, but, or cut yourself and we'll stop. We'll stop messing with you. And then they just never do.
Right.
They just keep at you. And there's a lot of instances where the voices will be correct. It's really weird. It's really strange. Right. Like there's instances where there were people that were told to run out into traffic and that they would be safe and that they would be protected. And they went out and ran into traffic, got hit by a car, got up and just walked away unscathed.
Right.
It's weird, dude. Weird and crazy stuff.
Especially when it comes to meth, because what you find is that a lot of meth heads have similar instances, similar experiences with shadow people. And, meth isn't normally considered a mind control drug, but any mind altering drug can be a mind control drug if done in the right way. And so these shadow people, I think it's related to the extreme sleep deprivation that goes on when it comes to meth. So you end up seeing these things that normally your mind filters out, and they all have similar experiences with them. Like these shadow people are just watching them and they can't figure out why, they're having these experiences. They talk it over with other people who have done meth and they're like, yeah, I had those shadow people too. So it's really interesting how there is that crossover, and something that's seemingly metaphysical can manifest for multiple different people.
Yeah, and then there's been people with the gentleman that I was talking about that did the show with Jerry Marzinski. His name is Michael Dirk, and which is on my show. And if you want to check it out, it's on Raised by Giants on YouTube. But he basically, talks about how he would see full-on people that weren't there. Like full-on human beings that nobody else could see, that were interacting with him, that he was speaking with, that he thought was there but wasn't there. It's wild. And I think a lot of it does have to do with sleep deprivation, because methamphetamine is a common thing to that people do not sleep on, because and the more that you don't sleep, the more your mind starts to go and you start to hallucinate things.
Very common torture practice.
Yeah, I think that should be a common like a study, and not to use amphetamine or methamphetamine for the study, but just to see how long someone can stay awake and what the effects are of that. When at what point do they start to hallucinate? What point do they start to see things that aren't really there? And can they get back to normal when their mind has been that far gone? Because some people that are on these types of drugs, they just don't come back. Like they're like perma burnt, gone.
Right.
Perma fried.
Right. And it really doesn't take too much too. A lot of people think that, these things can be something that you come back from, but if you look at the chemical potency of a lot of these mind control drugs, they do permanent harm to the brain.
Yeah.
So, and in the doses that the CIA used in the MK Ultra experiments had a lot of permanent effects on the people that they tested on, especially some of the people who, killed themselves because of it. But I think that was more of like a cover-up operation. They knew that giving a certain amount to one of the members who might be going public would result in a plausibly deniable death.
Yeah, you have those types of strange things all over the place. You have Sidney Gottlieb dosing some of the CIA personnel unknowingly with LSD. One of them committed suicide. You also have the instance of James Forrestal, which was the Secretary of Defense. there's speculation and theory that maybe he was dosed with some sort of hallucinogenic as well, and then or he was murdered. And then there's also theories and thoughts of like an LSD aerosol that can also be used in the same type of way, kind of like the devil's breath thing that you're speaking about. That it could be done in a way that uh, can be put through the ventilation system of a building or your house or something like that to and that's a big theory that I got with our next film, so I don't want to give too much away on the aerosol aspect of this, but there has been a history, a really big history of people being dosed with these hallucinogenic drugs unknowingly. And that's a very scary thing. I mean, we have reports of all the time of like women going to bars and being dosed with weird freaking drugs and like, date rape drugs and all that and stuff like nowadays, So, and there's a long history of using these, and that would have to be the scariest thing that you could possibly go through. Like, taking some hallucinogenic drug recreationally and knowing that you take it is one thing, but unknowingly taking it,
Right.
that's going to bug you out, dude. Like that's going to, get your brain pretty much depatterned right there because you're not going to know what's going on. Like, why am I experiencing this? I didn't knowingly take anything.
Right.
I've known a few people that's been dosed with LSD unknowingly, and it's been a really terrifying experience for them because they think that they're losing their mind.
Right. Now, I'm not sure if inducing vomiting would be the thing to do, but I know that in a lot of cases, they talk about activated charcoal as being a mitigation tool for when it comes to if you feel like something is changing and it's very harmless. So if you carry around activated charcoal, if you've got, a night out on the town, having some activated charcoal that you could take as soon as you're starting to feel weird, right? Take 2, little pills, and then you're starting to mitigate some of that poison that's affecting your body. Activated charcoal is something to carry around without too much trouble,
And you're like, why? Why would I need to carry around? Just the thought and the theory that someone would need to carry around activated charcoal to dispersed being unknowingly drugged is alarming.
Right.
Why would that ever be a thought? But that's the type of world that we live in. It's strange times.
Especially if you're in Colombia and a lot of people are running around with devil's breath. You've got about 20 minutes to get out of there, or you're going to basically be a zombie. And you're going to be a zombie for about 8 hours if they get the dosage right. If they get the dosage wrong, you could die. So having that activated charcoal and having the ability to escape, those precious moments after you start to feel weird, before you start to go into a completely depatterned state, are the most critical. So you've got a very short time window. And if you're going to start mitigating that, I think having activated charcoal, even if somebody else is having an experience, having your own activated charcoal would be preferable. Now, I'm not sure about what other chemicals there are, but this is sort of like the catch-all. If you want a good catch-all, that's one way to go. And once you can start to, stay lucid, that's the key, is to stay lucid in these situations. Because if you can't stay lucid, you're going to find out it's not going to go well for you.
Yeah. And some people can have a really, that they're mentally strong and they're like psychically strong and they have a really good mental capacity. But just wrapping your brain around what's happening to you is probably the hardest thing, because it's a scary process of not knowing exactly what's going on because you didn't knowingly take some kind of drug. Like if you knowingly take a drug, you're expecting to feel some sort of way different than the way that you were previously feeling. So what's going to happen. But unknowingly getting dosed with a drug is a completely different story, because in your mind saying, oh, well, where did this come from? Who did this? What is this? And it becomes a depatterning tactic to me, because, you can't wrap your head around why and who did this,
Right. And not every drug affects people the same way. So having these different chemicals come into your body is not a given that you're going to have the same output. So a lot of these things can affect people in completely different ways and that they don't see coming, especially when it comes to allergies and things like that, which brings up what I think is the number one mind control drug, which is wheat. Right? We've got bread, which creates, these gluten allergies, right? These gluten allergies are the result of massive swelling and inflammation. And having an inflamed brain, you're not able to make decisions as well as you were before. And if you think about the history of humankind and the making of cities and clustering all these people together, that came about because of these grains that create a foggy perception of reality, because you've sort of decided you're going to spend the rest of your life in this partially inflamed state. And once people get out of that inflamed state, they're like, I can think clearly. So, and what do we see associated with wheat is ergot. Ergot fungus is where we get LSD from. So it's interesting how all these sort of chemicals kind of have an interplay on the level of, well, we created wheat and wheat really likes what we've done with it. So it hasn't died out. It's sort of become domesticated, and it allows us to continue sort of harvesting it in the way that we do. It doesn't shut down. It doesn't have a huge reaction to the environment that it's in. So it's like all of these things come together to create environments, cities, that allow people who want to centrally control things to do so. So yeah.
And then ergot poisoning also being responsible for apparently the Salem witch trials as well. Right. And the whole idea of where we get the witches from in the first place is supposedly from witches. Women. It's a theory and it's speculation. I don't think there's any proof for it, but I think it's just interesting that they would wipe the substance on on a broom, and then they would get on the broom, and then the substance would absorb into their skin, and it was a psychedelic substance. And it's just an interesting theory of how witches, the whole idea of a witch riding a broom came about was from a hallucinogenic substance being put on a broom, and them getting on the broom naked and absorbing into their skin. And that's where we get the whole idea of witches being on a broom. But ergot poisoning, for sure, that is I'm pretty sure that has been connected to the Salem witch trials, and it being a part of the reason why the women Salem were executed, because they were all tripping. They were all tripping balls, just like what you were mentioning earlier with these people that, in biblical times, and just tripping balls, dude, writing down these wild and wacky stories.
Right. And you've also got the Oracle at Delphi, where they've got this oracle sitting atop this volcanic crevice inside of a cave, taking in these fumes and then relating visions of the future, right? It's sort of like it's all tied into this sort of altered state of consciousness to be able to, see beyond the physical world's physical reality. And in a lot of ways, that is a huge threat to the powers that be. I watched this movie last night called The Illusionist with Edward Norton. And in that movie, he's seen sort of bringing back the dead in these holograms that he's created. And in doing so, the people of this Austrian, I think it's just Austria, they decide that they're going to follow him instead of following their king. So it's like the belief that this guy could contact the spirits made him a more central figure than the prince who was running that town. And so the idea there is that if you can start to show people a different way or some other vision of the future, you can kind of command their actions. And that kind of goes back to the assassins or the hashashin, which would be this group of people who used potent chemicals to drug these children into thinking that they're seeing the afterlife. And the afterlife that they set up was this massive like play stage where they believed that they were in paradise, and then they would drug them again. They would wake back up, and these assassins, as they're called, would become fearless, murderers. So they didn't have any fear of death anymore. So they would go out there and kill anybody who this Assassin's Guild wanted dead. And the use of mind control chemicals in that regard is just amazing. I mean, like, this guy figured it out. He had this whole beheading scenario where he promised he could bring this person back to life. So he set up this sort of magic trick where they could speak, right? And so he would have his troops come in there and show them that he had this person's head on a platter and it was speaking. And then after it was over with, he would actually behead the person to show that, yeah, look, this head was really a real person's head and it was really talking to you. And, the unfortunate victim would be just a prop in this whole sort of magic trick to get all of the troops on board with what he was doing. And they would just kidnap these orphans from all over the Middle East and turn them into the perfect assassins. And this was in the 1300s.
Unbelievable. That's wild, tricking people into believing in the afterlife under a hallucinogenic drug to turn them into assassins because they know for sure that the afterlife exists. That's wild. That's wild. See, all these things there's no telling what they've done and how they've done it, because the mind is such a fragile thing, and the way that they can the techniques and the things that they may have done we'll never really know, but that is very interesting.
Right.
Wild.
So this kingdom, I think you've heard of Shambhala, right? So these are the halls of Shambhala, and that's what they were talking about, is like, this is the afterlife, this is this great place. And it was a very small kingdom, the Hashashin Empire. And they sort of had a love-hate relationship with the Templars. And so this was actually before 1300, but like, they dominated the region because everybody was scared to death of this guy's abilities, right? And so it's the fear that really creeps into other people's minds. Once they start to see these things happen, then the fear sort of takes over and leads the way from there. And all we've seen since COVID basically is one fear tactic after another. Is just constantly trying to get people in this fear state so that you can lead them better in the direction that you want them to go.
Well, you have other techniques that have been done as well. You have, especially when it comes to these UFO cults, like you have to make yourself be perceived as something bigger than what you are, and that you're better than everyone else, and that you're the only person that can do this, that you're the prophet, that you're the Messiah, that you're the reincarnation of this famous historical figure. They're all famous reincarnations of historical figures. They all claim that they're the only ones that can disseminate this knowledge to the people. They're the only ones that are in communication with Ashtar 33, Galactic Federation of Planets, the Great White Brotherhood, the freaking avians. It's they have to put themselves on a big pedestal, and that is a common theme with any cult. The
Don't forget Robin Williams. Some of them like to be in contact with Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, you got to be in contact with Robin Williams. He's got to be a part of the Galactic Federation and assist you in your healings for $122 through Zoom. And he's got to appear to you in your bedroom at night. That's a real thing. Having the Love Is One cult with Amy Carlson. And that's the common thing with anybody that is perceived to, and it's so interesting too, because those types of people seem to be the most popular people for some reason. And it's so strange. Like it's the ones that profess to have something that nobody else has. You know, it's not like somebody like me that is just looking at research and digging into things and trying to figure out like truths and that does real work. It's the people that profess to know something that you don't know, and instead of telling you that, they keep that information to themselves when the information is completely 100% made up information. It's not real. But that attracts an audience, right? That attracts intrigue. People don't want to listen to hardcore factual information, which really bewilders me. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like, I would much rather listen to someone that is critical, common sense, has good information, accurate information, trustworthy information, then I would rather listen to somebody that has that is saying that they are the only one that has this information. They know what's going to happen. They have all these wild and wacky predictions for 20 years in the freaking future, or next month, or next year, or any of the stuff. And it's a news flash because it's the same thing that happens every single time. It never happens. Right. None of it ever happens. But people keep falling for the same nonsense over and over and over again. And these people amass a really, really big following of people. They do. They get thousands and thousands of views, like hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Like everything they post just completely goes viral. It's unbelievable. I don't understand it. I really don't get it. And
I think I got a good explanation for you. So let's say that most of the people following them have had something unexplainable happen in their own lives. And so the very first thing that they think is that since this was unexplainable and it happened to me, there must be more completely unexplainable things happening that I can sort of gravitate to. Now, instead of coming back and saying, how do I break this down rationally, put the things I do understand in certain containers, put the things I don't understand in other containers, and then try to walk through the steps to get to this greater understanding of truth. Instead of doing that, they go, well, I've got to look for somebody who's got the maximum amount of unknowable stuff that's going on. And so it's almost like a traumatization through inexplicable circumstances.
That's like almost like a trauma bond. That's exactly what it seems like. And people love the unknown, and that's why I'm convinced that people really don't want the answers. And that's why content like mine, I have to work 100 times harder than other people, because really people, they don't want the truth. They don't want ration. They don't, because there's already enough problems in their life as it is, right? They want the unexplainable. They want the fairy tale nonsense, because it takes them away from their normal, everyday, mundane life. And turns it, because that Netflix docuseries that I had Clyde Lewis on, that he was on episode 7 with the blobs of Washington State. He was in episode 7 of that. And he was like the main person of that whole episode. Every one of those episodes were like weird, supernatural, strange mystery things, and they're unexplained, right? I mean, there's rational thought and rational people inside of them that has their opinions, but at the end of every one of them, they're like, oh, we still don't really know what happened in this scenario. Right. And it's the most watched Netflix docuseries of all time. Right. People want that stuff. And
it's the frontier. I think that's great. I mean, that's what's always driven people is where the frontier is. And we're at the frontier now where we have to start looking at the unexplainable stuff because there's no more continents for us to visit, at least that we know of. So, there's the frontier is basically the mind and what's unknowable all around us,
I mean, there's been this big push for woo things all the time. And woo is really popular right now. It's popular than it's ever been. And I think that is in due part to religion as well, and people not wanting to believe that this is the only thing that we have, that life has no meaning, that we're just here floating in space, that we're just a rock in the middle of nowhere, and life has no meaning and life has no purpose. They would rather take the extraterrestrials, that the universe is so populated that there's these other civilizations and these galactic civilizations running around on spaceships, that there's life elsewhere on the planet, even though there's no evidence, no proof for it. They would rather take that than the example of us being alone. And I think that, in my personal view, us being alone is a way more fascinating thought and a way more fascinating idea. Like, why? Why would we be alone? What is this? What are we doing here? Is this a simulation? I think there's way more questions and way more things to ask if we are the only living things in the universe. If we are the only physical incarnation on the only planet that is inhabited by human-like beings.
Right. Well, I think there's
way more fascinating than we're just a little blimp on the radar of the entire universe, that there's thousands and thousands of other planets, because that doesn't make us special. That doesn't make us special at all. It actually makes us more special if we are the only living beings in the universe.
Right.
That would mean that we're very important.
Well, I think it's interesting how the narrative flipped on the UFO disclosure thing. I mean, we see them sort of going from, well, we've got these, what do they call them? This non-human intelligences, right? What does that mean? Like, we've got all these new abstractions that they've sort of jumped to instead of talking about their involvement in all of these other cases. Now, what you've been doing is showing people, yes, there's government involvement in all of these cases that should cause you to question the validity of all of it. But instead, they sort of had to jump to other sort of new abstractions to kind of keep people on that same level of thinking that maybe it was something else, like non-human intelligence. Is that a computer? Is a computer a non-human intelligence? Could I use AI in this process and then say I've been in contact with a non-human intelligence?
That's right. All these words have multiple meanings and multiple things, and the public thinks that it means one thing, and the people that are listening think that it means one thing, and then what they're actually meaning is something completely different. And that's been the game, and from the very beginning, like a lot of these buzzwords and a lot of the things that people talk about have ulterior and multiple meanings, and what you think that it means isn't the correct meaning from my personal not you, but people within the community, right? Like, you got crash retrieval. Crash retrieval is a big buzzword that floats around the community a lot, and people are like, "Oh, well, crash retrieval means that it was something that was visible. They saw it fall out of the sky. They saw it on radar, and they called the military. The military went and excavated and found it, and they took it back to the freaking lab, the deep underground military bases, and then reverse engineered it and turned it into their own technology." Well, that doesn't have to be the case. One, it doesn't have to have happened in modern times. It could have happened hundreds of years ago. Could have happened thousands of years ago. The craft could have been dug up in an archaeological dig in modern times, but it could have been there for thousands of freaking years, right? Alien invasion, right? You go to a different country, you're an alien. You're not from that country. You're an alien there.
Right.
You're just visiting. You're an alien, right? You just put freaking illegal in front of alien, and you have a completely different term of what an alien means, right? Everyone's like, oh, well, the aliens are all around us. They've always been here. They're creating alien human hybrids. Well, when you just tack on illegal in front of alien, it makes a lot more sense. Okay. Right. They are everywhere. They are here. They've always been here, and they are making hybrids.
Right. I think it's so funny that people don't think of words like brushstrokes, right? So if we're gonna take these abstractions, what we should do is think of them like a brushstroke on a painting. And if you have absolutely no idea why that brushstroke is right there on that painting in the place that it is, maybe it's time to look at it differently, because it definitely means something to somebody. And once you can have access to that meaning, you can kind of get away from some of the confusion that it produces, Well,
then you have like national security threat, right? That's something that the UFO community, especially the big proprietors of disclosure, talk about, is that this is a national security threat. Every time they have a panel or a governmental organization, it's always, these things are impeding our airspace. They're just all over military airspace. They're traveling with impunity and like all this stuff. Well, if you look at what national security threat actually means, a national security threat is another country threatening our country, or the citizens of a country threatening the country itself, right?
The government, yep.
Yeah. That's what a national security threat means. So it makes more sense to me that a national security threat would be that this is our technology, it's our military drones, it's our military craft. And if another country finds out that it's our craft, then and they figure that out, and they're like, this isn't really unidentified flying, this isn't really UAPs, it's your guys' craft, then we get exposed. And then if that other country gets a hold of that advanced military technology and they do it too, then that's the national security threat. Right? Not because extraterrestrials are flying around in American airspace or unauthorized airspace. It's because if another country finds out that it's our technology, then we're screwed. That's what they mean by national security threat. But it's been hid under the guise of ufology and hid under the guise of the community. And when people hear national security threat, under the context of UFOs and UAPs, they automatically assume that it's extraterrestrial,
right?
When it's not.
Well, that goes straight back into the MK Ultra. We can't reveal our own crimes because that would be a threat to national security. That would be a threat to us, the people who committed the crimes.
Exactly.
So I think this has been a great episode. I love talking mind control with you. Why don't you tell people where they can find your documentaries and tell them what's coming up next?
You can find my documentary, JFKX, Solving the Crime of the Century, on Amazon Prime. You can also watch it on Tubi for free with ads. If you have the Tubi app, you can just type in JFKX and you can watch it on there, or buy it on or rent it on Amazon Prime, whichever one is easiest for you. And if you'd like to check out my work, you can find me on Raised by Giants on YouTube, on any and all podcast platforms. And if you'd like to reach out to me personally, on Instagram at Raised by Giants Pod and Twitter X at Raised by Giants 8. Thanks for having me on, brother. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely wonderful. I can't wait for your new documentary to come out about all this sort of stuff. So it's been great having you on. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'll see you again next time.